The blue glow of May Evans's phone cut through the stillness of her Chicago condo at 2:17 a.m., slicing across her face like a cold blade as she blinked herself awake, heart thrumming with the disorienting panic that only comes from being yanked violently out of sleep. The screen pulsed with message after message, her parents' voices distilled into frantic digital text. "May, please call us. It's urgent. May, where are you? Emergency. Call now." She scrolled, her hands trembling despite herself, the sleek serenity of her meticulously designed apartment, a sanctuary of glass, chrome, and calm tones built as a shield against family chaos, clashing with the digital cacophony of need, panic, and accusation. Then it appeared, stark and undeniable, a news alert hovering above the sea of unanswered pleas, a mugshot, grainy but merciless, of her brother Tyler. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair limp, but the smirk was the same, the half-cocky grin he had wielded his whole life, the one that always told their parents he would be rescued no matter what, the one that said he knew charm could erase any consequence. May's stomach hollowed, her pulse drumming in her ears, because even here, hundreds of miles from Hartford, even cocooned in the life she had built deliberately to escape this dynamic, Tyler had found a way to pull her back in. The phone rang, vibrating hard against her palm, and before she could talk herself out of it, she answered. Her mother's voice poured through, shrill and fractured, begging, pleading, "You have to help him." And then her father's steadier but trembling baritone cut in with the words that confirmed the headline wasn't just rumor. Wire fraud, embezzlement, millions stolen, the FBI involved. The kind of charges that didn't vanish with excuses or parental checks. "You're a lawyer, May. You can fix this," he insisted, his voice breaking in a way she had never heard before. And behind him, her mother sobbed like her world had ended. May pressed her forehead to the cool glass of her window, staring out at the glittering Chicago skyline, the towers gleaming like indifferent guardians, and whispered the question she already knew the answer to. What exactly is he charged with? The reply came like stones dropped in water. Wire fraud, embezzlement, $2.5 million siphoned away in a scheme that had left investors ruined. They expected her to step in, to be the net that caught their golden son before he crashed, because wasn't she always the one who managed, who solved, who kept her own crises silent? She thought of the call she had made 6 months ago from the same window, voice steady despite the desperation twisting her stomach, asking her parents for a temporary loan when her condo flooded, explaining that insurance would cover it eventually, but she needed $12,000 to stay afloat. Her mother's voice had been cool, distant, ending with that cruel parting shot. "If you'd focused on being a wife instead of a lawyer, you wouldn't be dealing with this alone. Caleb would have handled it." Caleb, her ex-husband who had cheated with her colleague. Caleb, who her mother still framed as the solution to her independence. They had turned her away, claimed poverty, and then 2 days later posted smiling pictures from Florida on a chartered fishing boat with Tyler, celebrating his new venture, which she now knew had been another layer of fraud. They had found $60,000 for him without blinking, while she had been left to sleep in a temporary sublet that reeked of mildew. They had excused missing her piano competitions for his baseball games, leaving her law school graduation early for his situation, dismissing her every milestone while throwing parties for his half-steps. 33 years of being the afterthought, the strong one, the one who didn't need anything. And now they were calling. Once again, not to ask about her life, not to wonder if she could even leave her job or obligations, but to demand she save the son they had built their lives around. She felt the anger rising, hot and unfamiliar, coiling into something harder than the resigned bitterness she usually carried. Her attorney's brain, honed by years of corporate finance cases, calculated the reality. Federal wire fraud charges, millions missing, FBI investigation. This wasn't a traffic ticket, it wasn't a bar fight, it was prison. Yet her parents' voices clung to the illusion that this was just another misunderstanding, something their daughter could polish away. She didn't promise them help. She couldn't. Instead, she said the only thing she could manage, voice cool and measured, "I'll come tomorrow. That's all I can promise." Their relief was immediate, suffocating. Her mother's breathless thanks, her father's insistent that Tyler had always said May would come through if things got bad. They hung up believing she had pledged salvation, not realizing that for the first time, she was coming not as her fixer, but as the judge of what she would give, if anything. Dawn bled into the sky as she packed her suitcase, her reflection in the mirror sharp with resolve. The woman staring at herself looked familiar but changed, eyes hard, jaw set. She had spent her entire life trying to earn a fraction of the love they lavished on Tyler. She had bent herself into shapes to be seen, to be acknowledged. And now, standing in the early light, zipping her case closed, she felt the weight shift. She would go to Hartford. But this time, it would not be to rescue, to gravel, to prove her worth. This time, she would walk into the house that had forgotten her and speak truths they had spent decades burying. This time, they would see the daughter they had overlooked and the golden son they had raised into a criminal. And when they asked her, as they inevitably would, to save him, she would decide on her own terms whether she was willing to give them anything more than the cold clarity of consequence. The Hartford house loomed before May like a relic from another life, its white siding and black shutters preserved with the same stubbornness that had always clung to her parents' vision of family, and stepping across its threshold felt less like returning home than intruding into a shrine where every wall worshipped a golden idol that wasn't her. The entryway struck first, photographs marching along the staircase, Tyler's life told in glossy progression from gap-toothed toddler in a Little League uniform to young man with a baseball bat raised like a conquering hero, to entrepreneurs shaking hands at the ribbon cutting of a bar now revealed to be a fraudulent facade. And conspicuously absent from the display was her own history, her valedictorian medals, her law school graduation, the debates and piano recitals she had fought to win with no one in the audience cheering. The air was thick with polish and dust, a false cleanliness hiding the rot of decades. And when her parents greeted her, her mother's eyes swollen and rimmed with red, her father's shoulders sagging beneath an invisible weight, they said her name with relief, as if she were not their daughter, but a resource summoned in crisis. On the dining room table lay the truth stripped bare. Bank statements, court filings, property deeds, the evidence of Tyler's sins scattered like puzzle pieces that required no assembling to reveal the image of deliberate crime. A bright yellow post-it note stuck to the deed caught her eye, for Tyler's bail. And when she asked, the answer came hollow and immediate. They had mortgaged the house, $600,000 pledged to keep him out of a cell until the trial. May sat, the wood of the chair pressing against her spine, and leafed through the documents with a lawyer's cold precision, her stomach tightening as the fraud revealed itself to be not a single desperate act, but a pattern stretching 18 months, wire transfers to shell accounts, withdrawals coinciding with trips to Las Vegas, investor lists populated with names she recognized from her parents' community, the Hendersons, the same couple who had brought casseroles during her mother's hip surgery. And now, their retirement savings were gone. Her parents hovered behind her, murmuring excuses, clinging to the idea that poor decisions were not crimes, but May's voice, cool even to her own ears, named what the papers proved: felony. She excused herself, drawn upward by old muscle memory, and in the attic, beneath the slant of a single narrow window, she found the box shoved behind dusty ornaments and brittle wreaths, the cardboard faded, her mother's neat handwriting spelling May Achievements, as if her life's work belonged in storage alongside tinsel. She dragged it into the light, sneezing as dust motes swirled, and opened it to find her past discarded. Her valedictorian medal tangled with hooks for Christmas bulbs, honor roll certificates folded and creased, her Harvard Law acceptance letter crumpled beneath a string of broken lights. She held up the medal, its ribbon frayed, and thought of how it should have gleamed proudly on a mantle, but had been buried while Tyler's baseball trophies shone downstairs. Underneath the papers, heavier, more damning, lay folders of financial records, her father's meticulous documentation of decades. And as she sorted them chronologically, the story sharpened into numbers that stung like lashes. $175,000 for her tuition, much of it offset by scholarships and jobs, versus $230,000 for Tyler, who had dropped out twice. $2,000 spent on her used Corolla against $21,000 for his shiny new Jeep, $0 in housing support during her divorce and flood, against $60,000 wired into his bar venture and 3 separate rent bailouts? Nearly $500,000 funneled to him, less than $10,000 to her. The weight of the disparity pressed down harder than the attic dust, not just the money, but the message it carried. That she had been the strong one, the independent one, the one who didn't need, while Tyler was always positioned as the fragile one worth saving, worth gambling futures for, worth mortgaging homes to keep afloat. She carried the records downstairs, her arms trembling not from weight, but from the fury they represented, and set them on the kitchen counter where her parents whispered like guilty teenagers caught sneaking out. Her mother asked what she had been doing with all that old stuff, as if her achievements were clutter, and May held up her medal, her voice steady, asking why it had been buried for 15 years while Tyler's participation trophies lined custom shelves. The silence that followed was louder than any defense they might have mustered. Her father admitted he was on the phone with financial advisors, liquidating what little was left of retirement to feed into Tyler's defense, and her mother's hands twisted around her wedding ring, trembling, unable to meet May's eyes. In that moment, May understood with clarity as sharp as glass. She had not been summoned to save Tyler. She had been summoned to save them from the wreckage of their own devotion, from the consequences of decades spent feeding one child at the expense of the other. And if she was to offer anything, it would come with terms. The house, the attic, the documents, every artifact confirmed what she had always known, but never seen so brutally bare. She had been erased in favor of a son whose light had now burned them all. The county jail visiting room struck May before she even sat down. An assault of sounds and smells that clung to the walls like mildew, the institutional beige paint chipped and scuffed, the air heavy with the acrid tang of bleach fighting a losing battle against sweat and despair, the fluorescent lights buzzing with a sickly persistence that flattened everyone's features into pallor. She adjusted her skirt on the hard metal chair, its coldness pressing through the fabric as if to remind her she did not belong here, and set the manila folder in front of her, its contents already memorized, every bank record and forged document etched into her mind like a prosecutor's exhibit. Across the glass, the cubicles filled with murmurs, with the occasional crackle of laughter too loud, the jingle of keys at a guard's belt, the clang of a distant door shutting like a final judgment. Then, the correctional officer's voice cut through, flat with routine. Visitor for Evans. And May straightened, her spine aligning in the posture she carried into every courtroom. Chin level, face composed, the armor of professionalism wrapping around her. When Tyler appeared in the doorway, her first thought was how small he looked, how the orange jumpsuit hung from his frame, his hair unkempt, his skin dull. But then, as he drew closer, the familiar expression slid into place, the smirk that had been his weapon since adolescence, the grin that had excused stolen cars, failed classes, unpaid debts. He dropped into the chair opposite her, the plexiglass scratched and cloudy, distorting him into a ghost version of himself, and leaned back as if this were nothing more than a casual coffee. For a moment, she saw the boy her parents had adored, the one who had been given chance after chance, and then she saw the man those chances had created, a man who believed the rules bent for him. His eyes, though bloodshot, carried the same glimmer of arrogance, and his first words were a taunt cloaked in casualness, as though her presence here were inevitable, as though she were late to the role he always assumed she would play: fixer, protector, rescuer. But May did not respond immediately. She opened the folder with deliberate slowness, the papers sliding against each other like knives unsheathing, and began not with pity, but with evidence. She laid out the numbers, the transfers, the names of investors, and watched as his smirk faltered under the weight of facts. She named the Hendersons, neighbors who had once cared for their mother, whose retirement savings now lined offshore accounts traced back to him. And Tyler's mask cracked, just slightly, his jaw tightening even as he tried to lean forward with charm. He dismissed it as misunderstanding, desperation, bad luck. But she turned page after page, aligning dates with his trips to Las Vegas, withdrawals with his supposed business expenses, until denial looked ridiculous, even in his own eyes. The manipulation began next, as predictable as the seasons. He appealed to her profession, insisted she could call in favors, whispered that she could make this go away because she always did. Then he turned to their shared past, conjuring false debts, childhood favors, lies spun into half-truths, meant to bind her with guilt. He reminded her of times he had covered for her, stories inverted from reality, painting himself as her savior instead of the boy she had shielded while he sneaked out and got drunk. Each word dripped with the same entitlement their parents had fed him, the belief that she existed as his insurance policy. But May sat still, her heart pounding not with fear, but with clarity, because she had seen this all before. At 12, when he broke their father's watch and let her take the blame. At 19, when he borrowed her credit card for an online gambling spree. At 28, when their parents left her law school graduation early to deal with his latest fiasco. And yet here, beneath the buzzing lights and the guard's watchful eyes, the manipulation rang hollow, stripped of its power. She told him the truth, that she had already spoken to the prosecutor, that the evidence was overwhelming, that the only path forward was a plea. She laid out the terms as clearly as she had ever argued a contract. 18 months in federal prison, 3 years supervised release, 6 months home detention. Restitution payments. The words landed like blows, and for the first time she saw his bravado slip into fear, his eyes darting, his mouth opening with panic, because prison was no longer an abstract threat, but a real, looming shape. He whispered about their parents, about how they would lose everything, and for a flicker of a moment, May saw not the manipulator, but the son who realized he had dragged his mother and father into ruin. But even that shred of remorse was tangled in selfishness, for he had thought of it too late. She told him as much, her voice low, final. He begged then, his tone shifting from arrogance to desperation, his hands pressing against the glass as if he could pull her into his orbit once more. But May had already decided, had already crossed the threshold from overlooked daughter to woman who no longer bent to her family's script. She closed the folder, the snap of it final, and rose from her chair. Behind her, his voice rose, first wheedling, then angry, then desperate, calling her name, shouting that they were family, that she couldn't walk away. But the heavy door shut with a clang, slicing his voice off like a guillotine, leaving only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the rhythm of her own footsteps carrying her out. In the parking lot, September sunlight struck her face, too bright, too sharp after the dimness inside, and she gripped the steering wheel of the rental car so hard her knuckles whitened. Only then, in the privacy of steel and glass, did the tears come. Not for Tyler, not for the criminal who had stolen and lied, but for the girl she had been, the child practicing piano for parents who never came, the teenager debating to empty seats, the law student walking across a stage without cheers. The tears burned hot, not with grief, but with release, a purge of decades of longing, a final burial of the need to earn what should have been given freely. She wiped her face, steadied her hands, and started the engine. The decision already crystallized. Tyler would face the consequences of his choices, and she, at last, would no longer be the afterthought. The federal courthouse in Hartford rose like a monument to consequences, its gray stone facade imposing against the crisp autumn sky, And as May approached the steps, with her parents shuffling behind her, the air buzzed with reporters, clustered like vultures, their microphones thrust forward, their cameras clicking with the hungry anticipation of blood in the water. Her parents looked shrunken, diminished from the confident figures who had once swept into booster club meetings, boasting of their son's promise. And for the first time, May felt the reversal of weight. She walked ahead, spine straight beneath her charcoal suit, while they trailed uncertainly, dependent on her steadiness. Inside, the marble floors gleamed coldly, the high ceilings reverberating with hushed voices and echoing footsteps. And when they entered the courtroom, the air thickened with tension, victims seated stiffly in the gallery, prosecutors arranging files with clinical calm. Tyler, seated at the defense table in an ill-fitting gray suit that sagged on his frame, his once polished charm shriveled into pallor and nerves. His eyes met May's briefly, pleading, but she gave no signal, only the small, impassive shake of her head, because she had already done more for him than he deserved by ensuring a plea deal instead of trial. The bailiff's call to order snapped the room into silence, and Judge Harmon's black robes swept in with the gravity of the law itself. The prosecutor stood, her voice steel disguised in simplicity, outlining the case with precision. How Tyler Evans had systematically defrauded investors, how he had used his parents' good name to lure trust, how he had siphoned $2.5 million into accounts that fed gambling trips and failing ventures. The first victim called to the stand was an elderly man with gnarled hands who explained in a trembling voice how he had trusted Tyler because of Richard Evans, because he believed in the family's integrity, and had lost his retirement savings for it. May's father flinched as though struck, and her mother muffled a sob. But May sat still, watching as the consequences her parents had shielded Tyler from for decades finally laid themselves bare in front of authority they could not manipulate. One by one, the victims testified. A middle-aged woman who had saved for her children's college, now gone. A couple who had invested believing Tyler's bar was a safe community venture. Each story was a mirror held up to her parents' choices, showing them that enabling him had not been kindness, but complicity. And when Tyler himself rose to enter his plea, his voice quavered in a way May had never heard, stripped of swagger, admitting guilt to one count of wire fraud. The judge's words were firm, final, 18 months in federal prison, followed by supervised release, restitution to begin upon release, the gavel striking like a stone dropped in a lake, ripples radiating through every life touched by his choices. May's parents sagged beside her, their faces crumpled, their illusions shredded. Outside, the reporters swarmed, and when one thrust a microphone toward her father, asking how he felt about his son's sentencing, Richard Evans hesitated, groping for the old excuses. But May stepped forward, her voice clear and unyielding. The Evans family acknowledged the harm done. Tyler was taking responsibility. Restitution would follow. Her words landed with the weight of truth, silencing the clamoring reporters. And in that moment, her parents looked at her with a startled recognition, as if they were seeing her not as a resource, but as a figure of authority in her own right. Months later, in Chicago, that shift had taken root. On Thanksgiving Day, the scent of cinnamon and sage filled her home, sunlight glinting off crystal glasses and silverware, and Lucas moved with ease beside her in the kitchen, his presence a steady warmth. When the doorbell rang, she opened it to find her parents changed in subtle ways. Her mother's hair threaded with silver, her father's shoulders softer, their voices gentler. They came bearing offerings not of demand, but of acknowledgement. Her old piano music retrieved from the attic, a compliment about her recent case they had read in the paper, wine for her fiancé. In the living room, photographs hung on floating shelves displayed not just Lucas and May, but even a few of Tyler, balanced among her own milestones, a quiet reclamation of space. Over dinner, conversation turned not to Tyler's needs, but to May's plans, her idea for a foundation to address financial abuse, her victories in court, her life built from the resilience her parents had mistaken for immunity. When Lucas suggested they each share what they were grateful for, May let silence linger, gazing around the table at faces once blind to her, but now softened, open. She spoke of second chances, of hard truths, of the strength that comes when illusions finally break. Afterward, as her mother helped her pack leftovers, she paused, eyes moist, and admitted quietly that they had been wrong, that they had assumed strength meant she did not need support, that their blindness had cost them years they could never retrieve. The words did not erase the past, but they marked a shift, the beginning of something repaired. That night, after her parents retired to the guest room, May stood alone by the window, watching snow drift softly under the streetlights, her reflection overlaying the falling flakes. She pressed her palm to the glass, the coolness grounding her, and whispered to the silence that had once been her only witness. Some things must shatter so that stronger things can grow. And in that moment, she knew that the shadow she had lived in her entire life was gone, not because Tyler's glow had faded, but because she had claimed her own light, steady and unshakable at last.